Well, hello. So glad we get the opportunity to continue our study of the book of Ecclesiastes, getting into chapter 9 today, kind of continuing that discussion at the end of chapter 8 of this question of, what can man know? How can man understand the ways of this life? So we're going to get the chance to look in chapter 9, got a lot of good material today. Want to again express appreciation for Trey Haskett from Tupelo, Mississippi, and Greg Kline from Birmingham, Alabama, joining us. It's been good to study with these men. Good to continue to build these bonds of fellowship through such good study. We're going to go ahead and start in chapter 9. We're going to take a look at the first 6 verses in Ecclesiastes 9. The preacher says, "For I have taken all this to my heart, and explain it, that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred. Anything awaits him. It is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, and for the unclean, for the man who offers a sacrifice, and for the one who does not sacrifice. As the good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all men. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterwards they go to the dead. For whoever is joined with all the living, there is hope. Surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have they any longer a reward, for their memory is forgotten. Indeed, their love, their hate, and their zeal has already perished, and they will no longer have a share in all that is done under the sun." And so right under the gate, we got the Ecclesiastes author really coming in with some very heavy ideas. Really, I think actually some of the more poetic language that he uses here is really using some powerful words. The hearts of men are full of evil and insanity in their hearts. And so really, what is the point of this kind of heavy language? We've seen the preacher use this type of language and make kind of shocking statements that are designed almost to kind of jar us in our thinking and to get us to pay attention to his point. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of preview it. His point really is going to be in verse 7 through 10, this next section we're going to look at. But I think there's some good things to look at here in these first 6 verses and some good wisdom for us to consider. And so he continues this discussion he had in the last 2 verses of chapter 8, where he's considering with wisdom, looking, and basically come to the conclusion that no man can understand all of the things that happen under the sun. And he says, because of that, I've taken all this to heart and explain it, that righteous men, wise men, their deeds are in the hand of God. And so he's making this point that there is a frustration, there's an evil that he sees under the sun, that all men die. And it doesn't matter what you've done, if you've been clean or unclean, righteous or wicked, any of these things, death still awaits every person. And it's important as we look into this discussion to remember that, one, this is the Old Testament, and so they have not had the full revelation of life after Christ. There's still a very murky understanding of the afterlife in this Old Testament time period. So it's important to remember he is writing from a different perspective than ours, but that doesn't change the veracity or the truth of what he's saying. He's making the point that after death, there's a fundamental change. There's a lack of ability to experience the things on earth that, when you're dead, which previously he's made the point that there's some benefit to being dead because you don't see the injustice of the world. You don't see the difficulties of life. But he also makes it clear there's a problem with being dead. You don't get to experience the good things of life. You don't get to experience the emotions and the occurrences of life. And so I think he's kind of clarifying for us, making the point that death is not a desirable thing. Death is not a net positive thing. That ultimately life is good, even in spite of the frustrations, even in spite of the injustices and the tensions that we've talked about. He's making the point that ultimately life is still better than death, and even a poor life, even a life of frustration, the life of a dog, for instance, which today we're like, we love dogs. Dogs are great. Remember, that's not the same case in Israelite society. Dogs are scavengers. Dogs are unclean animals, whereas a lion is kind of held up as this regal, proud animal. They're like, but even a live dog is better than a dead lion. And so he's kind of making a fundamental point here that even if we can't understand all the complexities of life, even if we can't understand all the tensions and frustrations, life is still worth the living, that there's still benefit to life. And that's going to really inform what he's going to say in the next section. Trey, what do you see in these first 6 verses here?
Yeah, I do think 7 through 10 are going to be sort of central for him in his argument. Not only central in this passage, but central in um, ultimately where he finds meaning, where he finds value in life. And there's really three things that he's going to deal with here in chapter 9. We'll get into a couple of those as we get into 11 through the end of chapter through 18 there. But this first thing is, again, this issue that he's dealt with before, and that is death comes to everybody. It's this great equalizer. One of the things, Andrew, that you mentioned is that he gives sort of these shocking statements to sort of awake us and alert us to understand what he's saying. And we get one of those in verse 1. And so he's going along in verse 1, and everything's good, everything's orthodox. So how the righteous and the wise, how their deeds are in the hand of God, that God is has some control and has some authority over them, and that's supposed to be a good thing, right? God is good, and so it's good that the deeds of the righteous are in the hands of God. But then he turns and he says, whether it is love or hate, man does not know; both are before him. And so, what is God's disposition towards us? How does God feel about us? What is His attitude toward us? Is it love? Is it hate? And he says, well, I just don't know. So as he begins here, there is sort of this shocking statement to say, is it really a good thing to live on this earth before God? And he's going to wrestle with this idea, as Andrew mentioned, of living even in a world where we face evil, where we face wickedness. And when we think of evil and wickedness, certainly those are moral categories in the way that we think about them. But even just things like bad fortune or disaster or unfortunate circumstances, maybe that might be a better way for us to think about those things. But that is sometimes our lot in life. And so looking at this world and looking at the things that we face, it can seem that really being in the hand of God, maybe that's not such a good thing after all. Again, I think we're going to get the curtain pulled back a little bit on that, and he's going to show his hand where he's at on that in 7 through 10. But at least right now, where we are in the tension, is life really good? And ultimately, yes, it's better than death, this great sleep where you know nothing and have no remembrance and have no experience. But that's really sort of a consolation, isn't it? And so that's the thing that shocks me about this, is how does God view us? And ultimately, he doesn't really have an answer for that here, at least at this point in his argument. Greg, do you have anything to add on to that?
I think in verse 6, in addition to being the great equalizer, if you will, it also is the great motivator. The idea that death comes to all is not only sad news, so to speak, that we are going to die, that there is not perfection here. And anytime we're away from that which is perfect, that's a tragedy in a sorts, except when you realize that God made it that way, that we have free will here and now, and there is something better for us. But if verse 6 is true, that their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun, it makes us value it all the more, right? So now if that is gone, we have to decide, what does this say? What does it matter? And so if we think about this, we really have to decide once and for all, are we fixated and focused on making the best of this life or not? And that's really going to be the transition here in verses 7 through 10, is are we making the best of what we do have? We have an opportunity here and now. Even dogs have an opportunity to experience life. The wicked have a chance to experience life. But how much more so then should we then be righteous, embrace this life, embrace serving God, and take advantage of the time? It really jumps to mind Ephesians chapter 5, redeem the time because the days are evil. Time is passing. We know from the last chapter that we don't get to decide when our number will be called, but we have a moment, and as long as we have breath, we should be thankful and make the most of it. Let's read verse 7 through 10 here. Go, eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white, let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. Now, I'll leave a lot of this for y'all to comment on, but I will fixate for the moment on verse 9. What do we do in light of the fact that we are going to die, that bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people, and all of the above to every kind of person? In verse 9, enjoy what you have. Make the most of it. If you have a wife, enjoy that life with love, the one you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you. That is your portion in life. That's what God's given us. He's given us days to be thankful. He's given us days to be grateful. And so that looks like a heart that says, you know what? The world is unfair and unkind, but God isn't. I may not know why he does what he does. I might not ever get the answers to the secret of life while I'm here. In fact, I know that I won't. But what I do know is I do have some blessings, and I need to count them, I need to enjoy them, and I need to glorify God. And really, that becomes a very simple thing to say, but a very difficult thing to practice, to be thankful in spite of a world of wickedness. Very difficult things to put into practice. Andrew, what do you see in the other verses here, 7 through 9, or even 10 itself?
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head. There's so much temptation to dwell on the negative, to dwell on the things that we can't control, and you can get caught up in it. I mean, you can really get just consumed with these questions and these frustrations and the difficulties of life, and in some ways it can manifest itself in some very positive ways, but very negative ways as well. Because if we do see the injustice of the world and it motivates us, to be people of justice, and it motivates us to spread God's justice, then that's a good thing. But if it motivates us to pessimism and frustration and doubt, then our dwelling on these things, our consideration of these things has been a net negative, even if wisdom is worth pondering. And so I think really this verse 7 through 10 really just gives us such practical, down-to-earth understanding. I really appreciate, verse 10 in particular, whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. For there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you're going. We often use this verse, I think, almost kind of in a pithy way that, whatever your hands do it to all your might. And by itself, that's, good advice. But when you put it in the full context of what Ecclesiastes is saying, is that death is coming for you. There's no real stopping it. And there's going to be a fundamental change that occurs in it. It tells you, stop being frustrated about this. Stop getting all caught up in these things. Go live life to the fullest. Go do good things. Go love your wife. Go eat your bread in happiness. Be thankful for the good things in life, because you never know when it's all going to end. You never know when all the good things of this life are going to come to a screeching halt. And that's okay, because none of us know when it's all going to come to a screeching halt. But what we can know, and that's really what he says in verse 5, that the living know they will die. They have a hope. They have an understanding of these things. So embrace that. Embrace the Havel of this life, not in, do Havel things, but recognize that Havel is a part of our life, that this vapor is the reality we live in. And so live your life with open eyes and go forth. Go do good things. Go live your life. Go love your family and go love God in return for it. And I think it's just enormously practical wisdom that, whatever you do, go live life to its fullest. So often we live in such a trepidatious and just half-hearted way because we're so concerned with everything else and the possibilities. And Ecclesiastes says, listen, I've done all that for you. I've thought through all of these things. The conclusion is just go live your life in a way that God sees fitting. Trey, what do you see?
One of the things that we see with these Carpe Diem passages that we found throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, where the preacher comes back to this perspective to say, yes, life is vanity. Life is like grasping after the wind. There are not always answers for this life and where we're going. But here's what we can know, and here's what we do find meaning and fullness in, and that is in the good gifts that God has given us. As he's gone through those, there's actually been kind of this progression. And so he started out, it's better to do this rather than to do that. In the last chapter, when we look at chapter 8, we didn't mention this, but he says, I commend that you do this. And now here's this command: go eat your bread. This is what you ought to do. And there's even this evolution in some of the things he talks about, so for instance, eating bread and drinking, that's been a common theme. But now it's drinking wine with a merry heart. And it's this idea of just this joyous, festive occasion. That's what life ought to be about. Let your garments always be white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. And here we've got this picture, again, of joy and celebration and prosperity and abundance. And then enjoying every facet of your relationship with your wife, whom you love. This is what life is about. And so there's an elevation of these things as we get toward the end of the book. And this is what God has approved for us to do. This is what God has given us. And that's not just a blanket statement, all right, everything that you do has a rubber stamp from God, but the things that God has given us and the resources, the relationships, the opportunities that he's put in front of us, we need to seek those wholeheartedly. We need to go after those things as much as we can, not in the way, which by the way, the preacher has already explored back in chapter 2. He went after these things just for the sake of indulging and seeking pleasure in them, and he ultimately found those to be empty and vain. Here's the difference. Am I doing it with an eye toward God? Am I doing it in gratitude toward God? Am I doing it in a way that says, these are the things that God has given me, and I'm taking them for what they are. I'm appreciating them for what they are. And so, yes, I am living life to the fullest, as it were. Guys, I don't know if you remember when we were back in school, you remember the phrase YOLO? And you only live once, right? And I always heard that phrase, and this was the sort of thing that I thought about anyways when I heard that phrase. I know a lot of people were saying, you only live once, so just go out and live recklessly and with abandon. Well, no, you only live once. You've got one life that God has given you, and so take it as he's given it and be grateful for it and live it to the glory of God. And I can think of no better message for us to walk away from than using this life and these resources to bring honor and glory to him through our gratitude and through our good stewardship of those things. Andrew, one of the things you were mentioning here at the end of this is that we just don't know when these things are going to happen. We don't know when we're going to die, and so live right now as if this moment is our last, so to speak. And that really gets us into verses 11 and following, because he's going to pick up on this idea of time and chance. And so beginning in verse 11, it says, "Again, I saw that under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happened to them all. For man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare. So the children of man are snared at an evil time, when it suddenly falls upon them. I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun. It seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and by his wisdom he delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. The words of the wise, heard in quiet, are better than the shouting of rulers among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons for war, but one sinner destroys much good." I mentioned at the beginning here that there are really three evils that the preacher looks at and that he sees in this life. First evil is death, that all are going to die. Doesn't matter if you're righteous, doesn't matter if you're wicked, everybody's going to die. The second evil here is that time and chance happen to everyone. And we think about time and chance, and particularly here in this negative light of evil happening. And again, that word evil, probably need to be thinking about that more in terms of like misfortune or bad things happening, rather than some moral type of evil or wickedness. And so time and chance, evil happens to all. That's the second thing that he sees that makes him despair of life. And the third thing is this, is that men are fickle, and that we can live in this world, and we can do good things, and we can have this wisdom, and we can even help other people, and we might not be remembered for it. And yet the course that we need to follow is still the one that seeks wisdom, recognizing that it's better to be wise and have no one listen to me than to be a fool and have everybody listening. And so again, he's trying to navigate all of these evils. And again, I think verses 7 through 10 sort of give us the perspective we ought to have as we live in this evil world. Greg, what do you see here?
I see three things that are very powerful in this section, and three, we might call them traits, three choices in life that are all powerful. Now, one of them is in verse 11, chance. No matter how strong you are, no matter how weak you are, chance happens to you. No matter how rich you are, no matter how poor you are, chance happens to you. Chance is powerful because by its definition, we can't control it or expect it always. That is, even if the chances are in our favor, there's a chance that the result will not be. Another thing that's powerful is wisdom. Right? You have this verse 14 picture. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it, besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in a poor, wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Wisdom is powerful. But then there's this other one. And so what you've seen so far is chance, which is out of our control, wisdom, which is one choice. And yet on the other end of the spectrum, the words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Sin is powerful. And so you have this spectrum here where you have sin destroys a lot of good. And then you have chance, which rules it all. And then you have wisdom, which can do a lot of good things. It can maybe undo damage of sin. It can prevent damage of sin in some ways. And so how do we balance those three is really the challenge of life. How do I live faithfully? How do I serve righteously, knowing that life can be random? And that randomness might seem unfair to me and extra fair to you, or vice versa, or unfair to all of us. How do I make sure that I pursue wisdom when sin can be so effective at causing destruction all around me? How can I be happy when maybe the sinner who's destroying much is destroying me out of his selfishness, and my chance was not in my favor because I got paired with or shackled to the one who causes much destruction rather than the poor man who could save a kingdom with his wisdom? We have to choose the wisdom. We have to learn to accept the chance and reject the sin. If you look at Proverbs as a whole, really, it's all about that. It's choosing wisdom, leaving temptation. Find the one who offers the words of life. Reject any path that segues away from it. Chance happens, but wisdom helps navigate even the bumps in the road. Sin exacerbates the bumps in the road, and often we can lead ourselves to where we feel like we're stuck. The good news is God never gives up on us, but we could save ourselves a lot of trouble if I would just learn now life is going to have chance and it's powerful. But if I avoid the power and destruction of sin and choose wisdom, much good can be done. Andrew, what do you see in these sections here?
Yeah, I think the illustration that's used with the idea of the wisdom of this small city with a few men in it, they're saved by this poor wise man, and yet no one remembers him. This seems like a Hollywood movie setup. It's this poor embattled little city, and the great king comes to it. It's this poor guy who ends up saving everything. I mean, think about how many movies follow that basic kind of plot line, and yet the Ecclesiastes author point is like, but nobody remembers that guy. And ultimately, his great deed goes completely unnoticed. And I think there is a lot of understanding of the human nature in this. And I think we tend to, think that good deeds are lionized, and ultimately, the good things are remembered and the bad things are forgotten. And yet, if you study history, most everything's forgotten. I mean, just the overwhelming majority of human activity, it's never recorded. The good deeds of a man on the street are not remembered by anybody past maybe his own family. And I think what you see is that the Ecclesiastes author is trying to make a point that if you're trying to make yourself into something bigger, into something greater, it's just not going to work. Your life is just never going to be this grandiose thing that, you become the hero for generations and generations to remember. And we all view ourselves that way. We all view ourselves as the protagonist of our story and the hero who comes through in the end. And Ecclesiastes kind of dumps a cold glass of water on us as like, you're just a person. And that could be discouraging. That could be like, well, but aren't I important? And the answer really is that no, you're not, except to God. And to God, you are important. In spite of being a small, insignificant part of the overall scheme of everything, God still cares about you. And so the solution then is to not despair that we're not the central part of the story, but to recognize it and to embrace that reality and to accept the idea that we may not be remembered by the world. We may not be remembered for all these things. The Ecclesiastes author's point is not, so don't do good. His point is still, wisdom is better than strength. And while the world may not see it that way, and the world may not remember the wisdom of that poor man, the implication is that, but God does. And God does see these things. And even if there's no evidence to it in front of us right now, and it seems as if all the wise men are being forgotten, the Ecclesiastes author never shakes from this belief that God is just, God is at work behind these things, and ultimately he's going to correct all of these injustices of the world. And I think there's an enormous comfort in that, yes, Ecclesiastes is being very blunt and very honest with us, but it's not being pessimistic. It's not telling us that there's no point. It's telling us actually that when you strip away all the vanity, all the Havel of this life, what's left is God. And that should be an encouraging thing to us. So as we kind of wrap up this chapter, what do we guys, Trey, what do you see as kind of some of the applications we can walk away with here?
Yeah, so in light of the three evils that he deals with here, the fact that death comes to all, that time and chance happen, and that you may not be remembered for the things that you do because man is just, frankly, man is fickle. In light of all of that, this question arises, where is God in all of this and how does he view me? Because it seems that when I look at the world through these lenses, through these eyes, I just don't see it at times. I see a lot of evil. I see a lot of chaos going on around me. Does God really care about me? And that's the question he asks in verse 1, or that stands behind the statement that he says in verse 1. Does God really care? And to get back to 7 through 10, I think that's absolutely, yes, he does. Yes, the world is enigmatic. Yes, things happen that we don't understand. Yes, we face difficult times and difficult circumstances because time and chance are out there and death is the great equalizer. But ultimately, God cares. And his is the only court of opinion that matters. So what if you're not remembered by the people that you seek to help in this life? God saw you. God knew what you did. God saw how you tried to act out of charity and wisdom and goodness. And God is giving us, God is giving me, God is giving you things to enjoy every day that should remind us that he really does care and that he really is there. And so despite all the things that we might see in this world around us that might make us despair of this life as evil, God cares and he wants to bless us and he wants good things for us in this life, even if it doesn't always seem that way. And so if we can hold on to that and approach life in that way, Andrew, I think that helps us to maybe rid ourselves of some of that pessimism that maybe we might be prone to. Greg, applications?
I think really what this chapter hits us with is we might not make a lasting impression, but we have a chance to live life. And it's easy to look at what you can't do and not focus on what we can. That often is an excuse to keep us from serving God better. Sometimes it's an excuse that keeps us from serving God at all. But really think for a moment about how little reputation in terms of history matters. Reputation matters in a community, but from 150 years later, not many people know. I don't even know the names of my great-great-great-grandparents unless it happens to be in the lineage that shares my first and last name. I don't really know anything about them, but I do know about my grandparents, and I know about my parents, and I know about my siblings, and Lord willing, I know about kids and grandkids. And they mean a lot to me, and they mean a lot to people that they know and love. And that's okay. It's okay to be thankful and grateful for who and what we have. Should I love my parents less because they won't be learned about in the way that George Washington is? Of course not. They mean a lot to me. They mean a lot to my life. But more important than even how we feel sentimentally about others is how does God feel about us? And with this one life that he has blessed us with, the question is not, will I last in the record books? It's, will I make the most of it? Am I thankful for what God has done? Do I give him the glory and credit and honor that he alone deserves? And do I make sure that I do the right things no matter what? Life is unfair. Chance plays a role. Sometimes, by the way, we don't like to talk about this part of chance. Sometimes the unfairness of life benefits us. For example, all three of us on this call were born in the United States of America, which from a historical perspective is a huge advantage from a religious liberty standpoint, from a riches standpoint. And while those things can make us soft spiritually, they can make us more apt to maybe sit on the sideline than we would be if we were being pushed and threatened not to make a choice one way or the other. There's a lot of blessings in that. Be thankful for what we have. Enjoy whom you have. Love, but most of all, serve God. Thank God and do what he says no matter what, realizing that we don't control chance, but God controls everything. It's a blessing to have a God who's in control. Andrew, what do you see here as you wrap us up?
Yeah, as we kind of conclude, I think that word chance is a really important one because when we think of the word chance, we think of typically in a gambling terminology, it's luck. It's, the random happenstances of the world. And really, that's not the point of Ecclesiastes' worldview, because to Ecclesiastes, there is somebody in charge, and it's not random chance, it's not random luck. It's imperceivable to us. We may not understand why something's happening, but that doesn't make it, the random fluctuation of a universe. It's still part of an ordered creation that God has. It's a creation that we don't fully understand, that we have a limited perspective on, and yet God is in control of it. And I thought your point was just so great, Greg, that honestly, it reminds me of the old country song by Alan Jackson, Little Bitty. And the whole point of that song is that it's all right to be little bitty. It's okay to be to live in a small town and to have a little family and just be focused on those things. And so often, we get focused on the macro scale and everything. And Ecclesiastes, I think, really kind of humbles us and be like, you can't even understand the macro scale. You can't even understand what's going on with all of this. So ponder God, think about God, follow God, but recognize that there's a difference between you and God. And that's where the idea of fear God comes in, is recognize the vast gulf of difference between us and God, and just accept who he is, trust in what he is saying. And there's so many doors that open up to that possibility. Thank you guys so much for another great study into Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Hopefully next chance, Lord willing, we will talk about Ecclesiastes chapter 10. We're kind of getting into the home stretch of the book. He's going to kind of continue to bind these threads that he's talking about, bring them into a solid conclusion in the final chapter. I want to appreciate both Trey and Greg for joining us. We're always glad to have this opportunity to study. We're looking forward to the next time. So thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to joining you again next time. Thank you so much.